It is my great pleasure to welcome you tonight to two speakers who probably need no introduction, but I will say a few words. Tarana Burke is the founder of the Me Too movement. Before that, she spent 25 years as an activist and an advocate. She has worked at the intersection of racial justice and sexual violence. She's been fueled by commitments to interrupt sexual violence and other systemic inequalities disproportionately impacting marginalized people, particularly Black women and girls. She is a proud native of the Bronx. Woo! Her passion for community organizing began in the late 1980s when, as a young girl, she joined a youth development organization called 21st Century and led campaigns around issues like racial discrimination, housing inequality, and economic justice across the city. That work, coupled with the desire to deepen her education and her organizing skills, led her to attend Alabama State University, a historically Black institution. Her organizing and advocacy work continued throughout college and remains a pillar of her professional life. Her career took an intentional turn towards supporting survivors of sexual violence upon moving to Selma, Alabama. There, she encountered dozens of Black girls who were sharing stories of sexual violence and abuse, stories she could identify with. She realized too many girls were suffering without access to resources, safe spaces, and support. Ever since, she has been dedicating her work to justice, ending sexual violence, and as we know, through the Me Too movement. She will be joined by Samhita Mukhopadhyay. Samhita is executive editor of Teen Vogue. She formerly served as senior editorial director at MIC and is the former executive editor of Feministing.com. She is the co-editor of Nasty Women, Feminism, Resistance, and Revolution in Trump's America, and the author of Outdated, Why Dating is Ruining Your Love Life. Her work has appeared all over, including The Guardian, New York, Medium, Jezebel, Vanity Fair, and Allure. Welcome these two remarkable women. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm so excited to be here. I love this auditorium.
I know. I'm like, this is nice. I'm going to do a little bit.
So we just heard your extensive bio that and I think, you know, the way that media works, you know, people would just think you're a celebrity organizer that's like going to the Vanity Fair Hollywood party, which you did go to, but
I did, twice. Yes. And I was still looking around like, why am I here?
But you are an organizer.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about the work you were doing. I mean, I know you have a multi-year career, you know, in the early 2000s, and then some of the context around when you first started talking about Me Too.
Yeah, my daughter jokingly calls me the Forrest Gump of the Forrest Gump of social justice, because I've done a ton of things. Part of it was when I joined 21st Century as a teenager, and I understood, I had this really, my family is very socially conscious, very, I was raised in a sort of Pan-Africanist, Black feminist household, so I had a lot of information, but 21st Century helped me bring that information together. Like, I could identify injustice because of the foundation I had, but they helped me figure out what to do about it. And so I feel like I was privileged at an early age to know, like, this is what I want my life to be. And so in that, and also having to like live and eat and, you know, take care of yourself, all of the jobs that I had were related somehow to social justice and nonprofit organizations. So that led me to do a ton of fair housing work, anti-sweatshop work, predatory lending work, like I just all kind of stuff like that. But while doing that, I always did youth leadership development and economic and racial justice organizing, some political organizing around like radical candidates and stuff. But I lived and worked in Alabama for a long time. And that's because 21st Century was based there, and then I went to college there. And a lot of the work there was around cultural organizing in some ways. I did arts and culture work too, and we use art and culture as a way to bring information into the community and to help educate, like educational outreach for the community. So it's just, there's so many different avenues that I've gone down, but the common denominator there is around justice and probably peace and safety as well. And that's a broad answer, I know,
Right,
but
no.
I was just, because it's just, I don't know, I would never know where to start. I broke off and started focusing on, so 21st Century helped raise me. I always say they raised me as an organizer. And I was very committed to doing that work as well, like bringing another generation up like I was brought up. And then, so the organizing work was sort of my not paid in the community stuff. And then working in 21st Century, I started running the cultural programs in Selma for youth. And it was really clear to me, I ran a big after-school program called Be Back. It was the Black Belt Arts and Culture Center. And we would pay attention to the boys, even if we weren't trying to, right? There was a particular way that the boys just garnered a lot of attention from us. Either they were acting up or they were being rewarded for not acting up and things. And I would notice that the girls sort of just kind of fell by the wayside. And I remember telling my girlfriend, like, we have to do something different and specific for the girls. And so that started off, this wasn't around sexual violence. I literally ran from that for a while. It was about leadership development, but it was also about helping these group of girls, these little black and brown girls, develop a sense of self-worth, which I consider radical organizing work as well, right? I think the way we go about trying to politicize people without grounding them in a foundation to deal with the world, like we want to fight oppression, but we don't have the tools to deal with oppression, you know, is not the right way to go about it. So I took on the task of trying to ground these young girls in a sense of self-worth so that they had the tools to look at this oppression in the face, to look white supremacy in the face, to look all these things in the face and say, this is a lie, right? In doing that work, and it was really rewarding and successful work, there were all of these ways that we were being inundated with information about how much sexual violence these children had experienced. And I knew, obviously I was a survivor, and I was grappling with what that meant for me, and I was, trying to figure out, I didn't have words like healing and all of that, but I knew I wanted to feel different. And so in doing that, I have my private work happening, and publicly I'm working with these children, and I keep getting this information, and I keep going out to the elders, to the people who raised me in this work, and saying, yo, this is a problem. This is a problem. And they would say, oh, well, they need more counselors in the school, or start talking about the parents. And it just was the same thing we see around sexual violence now. And so it became clear to me that the same lessons that they gave me around being organizers, like when we were coming up in the program, they would say, you have to go back. We're trying to give you the tools to go back in your community and affect change. And it was always wrapped around the violence we experienced or some sort of economic oppression, racial, like those kind of injustices. Never did gender ever come up. Never did gender-based violence come up. Never did sexual violence come up. And I was just like, why not? Why don't we this is a community problem, And it really was not, it's kind of frowned upon. And I think people thought I think I even had an elder, I don't ever talk about this because I hate to, you make your elders look bad, but I had an elder once who basically accused me of being lazy. He was like, this ain't work. I heard you not, because I had quit some other stuff and I was really focused on, that's not work. You got work to do. We need you in the fight. And I was like, what? Oh, okay. Yeah, so it was, I forgot what your question was, but come on.
Well,
sorry. I told you, I do ramble.
Yes, no, I mean, we're embracing it. I think, what you bring up is that sexual assault is often seen as an interpersonal issue.
Always, yeah.
Not as a movement issue, and there's all these consequences when you don't kind of address social issues and incorporate the role that sexual violence plays. But what I'm interested in is, so then you coined the term Me Too, right? You coined this kind of idea, and then fast forward to 2017, and I don't, Alyssa Milano tweets it out, and it goes viral, and then
Y'all know that story? No, I'm just playing.
and some, young people on Twitter rightfully called her in, and
Young black women.
yes.
And women of color definitely were the first line of defense, like, no.
Yeah. And so you were then dubbed the founder, and as we've talked about, now the leader of the Me Too movement. Talk to us about what happened. I mean, I know there was like a Good Morning America segment, and then all of a sudden it was like in the mainstream.
That week was crazy. That week, which is coming up on 2 years now. So the first day, and I often try to tell this story chronologically so that people will stop calling Alyssa like, they treat her so badly. She didn't try to steal anything for real. And quite honestly, so the day that Me Too went viral, I was home minding my business, and and actually not answering the phone because it was a Sunday, and I thought my mother was calling me because I didn't come to church, and I was like, we just gonna act like we sleep. And then my phone kept going off. I had like Facebook messages and text messages. Different people were like, and they were different. Some people were like, "Oh my gosh, congratulations! I see Me Too everywhere, whatever." And I was like, "What are y'all talking about?" Because I didn't really tweet. I wasn't like a tweeter. And then a friend sent me a message on Facebook, and she was like, "This is dope. I'm pushing it out, da 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 da." And I was like, "What? Show me the thing." And because I don't tweet, I went on Facebook. I went to look for it. I didn't see it. And I was like, "This is dumb. What are they talking?" And then she showed it to me, and I was like, oh, "Who did this?" Because quite honestly, all jokes aside, if I had my choice, I wouldn't have done that, right? I mean, of course, something like that goes viral because there's so many people affected by sexual violence. And so the thing that was alarming to me when I got my bearings, which was a couple of hours later, was alarming is that I'm watching all of these tweets. There's no container to process, right? There's just people like cutting and bleeding all over the internet. And then people like, the news is like, look at all the people that said Me Too. Look at the celebrities. And they were like going through the tweets. Have y'all seen these? There was like news programs where they would like show all the tweets and they'd pull out the famous people that said Me Too. And I was just watching this happen. Like, I would not have done that because I would want to have, prior to putting a hashtag out like that, put some things in place for people once you do that, right? I know the consequences in small spaces, so the consequences on the internet is like, So I'm watching all of this happen, not knowing what to do. And then I kind of had this turnaround. I'm actually writing my book right now. Shh, don't tell nobody. But so I have a lot of stuff like fresh in my brain. I was just writing about this today, about this moment where I had to make a decision because I really did feel protective at first. I felt like white people gonna take my stuff and they're not gonna give it back, right? If this goes out into the world, nobody's gonna believe a 44-year-old black woman from the Bronx started this or was using this language or, it's just not gonna happen. And I would just go down in history like the lady they said wrote whatever movie, What's the Keanu Reeves movie? The Matrix. They said a black lady wrote The Matrix. Yes. We don't really know. Did she write The Matrix? Did she? It's like an urban legend, right? And I was like, I'm just going to be an urban legend. Like, I heard once that there was a black lady.
Would never.
Right? I just was resolved that was going to happen. And so I had all this anxiety about that. But then I'm also watching this thing happen on the internet. And it really became, this is like one of those moments of, where the rubber meets the road or whatever you want to call it, where I had to make a decision, right? Like I said, I knew from a very early age what my life was going to be about. And this was like one of the biggest tests. Like, are you going to be who you said you were? And my whole life has been in service of people, in service of humanity, if you will. I don't want to sound all, whatever, but really that's what it's been. And so this moment couldn't be different. And I also didn't know how to insert myself in it. And so I put out my little information about Me Too and my little video of a speech I made in 2014 at the the Philly, they used to call it slut walk, with the march to end rape culture or whatever. And I just and then because I have a lot of friends in media and stuff like that, people started retweeting it and whatever. Alyssa got word pretty quickly. She reached out to me the next day. She sent me a message. She's like, what can I do to amplify your work? But she tweeted out the website. She tweeted out. That's why everybody knows the story of Heaven, because she tweeted out the story. People just forget that. And they're like, Alyssa Milano tried to steal your movement. I'm like, she didn't try to steal my movement. Like, how do you steal a movement? But anyway, then I went on Democracy Now!, which, I mean, for us, this is I'm sure everybody watched Democracy Now!, right? This is like I might as well be on CNN, right? I was like, Democracy Now!? And Alicia Garza, who I knew prior to, this organizing, where, like we said, we know a lot of people. Alicia Garza, and this is a beautiful thing about amplification, they called her, because folks do that. Hey, you know about movements, right? Come talk about this Me Too thing. Right. They called her, and she called me. Right. So I go on Democracy Now!, and that was it for me. I was like, well, I've been on Democracy Now!, and, this is it. And then Alyssa said she was going on Good Morning America, and would I come on with her? And I was like, oh my God, this is for real TV. Like, and I did. I pre-recorded my segment for her, for that show, rather. And then the day the show airs, and you heard me tell the story, the day the show airs, they had me in a little box in the corner. And so it's all Alyssa live via satellite in Atlanta, and she's all serious, and she's like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then they flash to me, and I'm like, yeah. It was like that Frosted Flakes commercial. It was like, I love him, thank you. And then that was it. And her people were calling. I didn't have any people then. I was just like, you should see what I had on. My hair wasn't done. When I look back at those days, I was like, ooh, Tarana. I had this old Banana Republic jacket on. But they called, and I was like, no, they didn't show me. And so then Alyssa says on TV, we're here because of the work of Tarana Burke. And we owe her a debt of gratitude. And just like that, things start changing. It took a minute still. So I got like New York Times and all, so things start snowballing. I really think, though, that the space opened up for me because at some point, the actresses who are amplifying this are passionate, and they are speaking from their personal experience. But there was really not a person to speak from the experience of why is this happening? Why do these words resonate? What happens now? And so that this space started opening up because people wanted those questions answered. And then I was able to come in and try to answer them. Yeah.
And we're so grateful for that. So, since that date, a lot has happened.
A little bit.
We've seen bad men go to jail. We've seen public conversations. We've had many, many more women coming forward or people coming forward with stories. It's hard to, I think, as you say, like, who owns a movement? It's really hard to trace often the beginning of a movement, right? Or all the different kind of turning points. Do you think that there was momentum building and this was a flash moment before this? Like, do you think that the groundwork was kind of being laid already? And
yeah, I do.
We just built upon that?
I do. I think that you don't get to Me Too going viral without people. So I have my experience, my very real lived experience was that nobody wants to talk about sexual violence. And prior to 2017, I'm talking about 15 plus years of experience of, I could never fill a room like this. Yeah. If it was just like, come out and talk, let's talk about the epidemic of sexual violence in the country, people are like, nah, I'm okay. And so I would go and try to get on programs, right? So I know that this was not a topic people wanted to talk about unless it was some salacious headline that happened. But you have a couple, the Cosby case happened the people keep putting it under Me Too, a few years before, and we saw how that happened. Like, I think particularly for women, remember that New Yorker cover? Yep. Remember that? Yep. And it was so jarring, and I think there was this unearthing. The Fox News thing happened, and then the election happened. Yep. And I think for so many people, not just women, I think it was a bridge too far. if you can have a person, I mean, it also tells you how little we think about sexual violence, because you have somebody who admits on camera, on microphone, that you're a sexual predator, like, I just grab them, and the people are like, well, it's not that bad. And you also say that you can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and it's not, so I think it was just a bridge too far. Women's March happened, so there was this growing momentum. Even like Black Lives Matter and Occupy Wall Street, like we have been for almost a decade now, sort of coming back to a time where people are realizing. I was gonna curse. I was trying to think of a better word. Things are mucked up. Yeah. And we have to be active about it. And so I think it laid the groundwork very much for Me Too to go viral, but also to give people the courage to keep the conversation going. Because remember, maybe a year or two before Me Too went viral, what was it? Why Did I Stay? Oh, yeah. The one about domestic violence, when the football player was on video. And so, I mean, that was a viral moment, and the woman who started, who's an amazing woman, I can't think of her name, who started it, had done the work similar to me, had been doing this work for a while, but we didn't have a sustained conversation about domestic violence and intimate partner violence in the country after that. It was like a sort of a blip. But I also think stuff like that primed the soil to have this conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And the famous people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's drawbacks like to celebrity activism, but then there's also these huge benefits of exposure and catapulting movements into the mainstream.
I mean, people want to talk about those women all the time, and I think it's actually really disrespectful, because the women, I don't care what they did in Hollywood, what list they're on, whatever, if they came forward and said they had these experiences, we should respect that experience. And none of them came forward thinking they were going to help propel a movement forward, right? None of them came forward to be the founders or leaders, or none of that. As a matter of fact, most of them thought they might not work again, right? And so it's so disrespectful for people to be like, oh, it's just about these white women in Hollywood. No, it's about media's obsession with white women in Hollywood, right? Those women didn't come forward to think this was going to boost their careers, but the media can't stop talking about them, right? And some of it is us, because we can't stop wanting to know about their lives. Like, you can't say, we spend so many hours and days wanting to know who's sleeping with who wore what to wear, who was on a trip in a bikini with cellulite showing, and all of this nonsense that we obsess about celebrity, and then we're mad because the media is focusing only on the celebrities. This is a celebrity-driven culture. So I'm not mad at those women. They're survivors. And it was just as hard to come, I mean, if not harder, the lift of coming forward and saying, this is my experience with one of the most powerful men in their industry. It's just, we gotta stop, like, we just find new ways to blame women for anything. We gotta stop having that conversation. There is a racial conversation to have, don't get me wrong. That's not the one. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you.
So as we come on the anniversary, the 2-year anniversary, New York Magazine yesterday published a piece that basically looks at what happened to the survivors, many of the survivors that came forward with their stories.
Finally.
And it's, there's been a lot of ink spilled on Me Too has gone too far and the consequences, and not as much. And the kind of main piece that's penned by Rebecca Traister talks about how, while we are spilling so much ink on what's happened to the accused, we haven't been tracking the stories of those that have come forward. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about that, and kind of, I really appreciated what you said the other day. We happened to be at a conference together over the weekend. It just worked out that way. But I appreciated what you said about, this is not a movement about going after a few bad actors. No. This is about systemic injustice. And so how do we balance those two things?
It's been, Rebecca, I love. You all should know and read Rebecca Traister. And she and I have had this conversation, and we've had it so many times. Coming up on this anniversary, I've had so many invitations to come and speak, and the topic is there a way back for these men after the Me Too movement? What's the road to redemption? And I'm just like, you know what? Stop asking me, y'all didn't see that. Stop asking me these questions. It's so offensive. And this New Yorker piece, New Yorker, right? New York Magazine, is probably one of the first prominent articles about survivors. Last year, Variety, I did a cover story for Variety on the anniversary about survivors, and they had the cover of the magazine was about the survivors. Often when I talk, I run through the names. When I do a pop quiz for people, and I say, we can right now popcorn at least 10 names of the most prominent men who've been accused or what have you, and you couldn't name 10 survivors for me. And so it's such a problem that we can have a movement that has really been built on the backs of survivors. Me Too doesn't exist if 19 million people don't tweet about it, right? Yes, it would have been a celebrity story, right? Because Weinstein, before Me Too went viral, was a huge story, and it would have continued to be a huge story. It would have died down, and then it would come back for the trial and blah, blah, blah. But this sustained conversation, this phenomenon came from individual people having the courage to say Me Too. And the fact that we do not circle back to find out what they need, how do we live in a world where 19 million people can raise their hand and say, this has affected my life? How are we not interrogating that, right? It's inhumane. And so I feel like a broken record for the last 2 years. That's why I talk about survivors so much, because who else will? You cannot forget these people. You cannot forget us. You cannot forget people who had the courage. I don't care if you volunteered for an expose or you literally just put #MeToo on your Facebook page. There is courage in that. There is also labor in that we have to acknowledge and not like how do you keep moving beyond that? Yeah. And also talking about talking about it as a systemic issue. When you have millions and millions and millions of people that are affected by a thing, it's obviously a systemic issue, right? We're going to individualize all of this. But again, sexual violence is one of the only areas of both crime but also social justice that even people within social justice don't acknowledge it as a social justice issue. But beyond that, we rally around everything else. Right? It's the only thing that we put back on the survivor to deal with by themselves. Even these we have programs, we have clinic, we have all this stuff that's just about let me help you, let me give you these services and hope you'll be okay. But how, again, if a person is shot in your community, right? A person, and we've seen it, Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin, somebody is shot in your community, Mike Brown's body laying out for 4 hours, and we have to watch that. Right? It moved people. It made people want to rally together and join this movement and say, Black lives do matter. How are you not moved by millions of people saying, my life has been affected by this violence? Why don't we feel like when anybody experiences sexual violence in our community is not safe? A child gets shot in a neighborhood and people rally around the parents and the parents start organizations and they say, we're going to get guns out of this community and we're going to stop the violence in this community, and everybody comes to the meetings and they wear the t-shirts, and a girl gets molested in that same community and they're like, be quiet. Don't tell anybody. This is your problem to deal with. We have to shift that dramatically, and it happens in all kind of different ways in all kind of different communities. It's appalling.
That's beautiful, thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing that I have been thinking about a lot, and we did talk about this a little bit backstage, is, outside of this idea of redemption, but the concept of restorative justice. Yeah. And, I think myself as a survivor, I didn't want to prosecute or involve the police. Like, I didn't want to involve any of that for many reasons. But there would have been, like, if at any point I could just be like, you knew what, like, this happened to me and this is the concept, and like that would have potentially helped me in my healing and in my journey. And I'm curious to know where you see, because it's such a diverse and complex issue that impacts so many different types of people. where does because also when these guys go to jail, it's hard not to cheer. It's hard not to cheer when Bill Cosby's going to jail. It's hard not to cheer and when Harvey Weinstein is going to jail, or R. Kelly, you know, people that we've been like, finally.
Right.
Finally. And then there's the other side of me that's like, the police system, the police state, and the prison system perpetuates sexual assault. Is practically a rape center.
Exactly.
So how do we use those types of tools and that type of system to heal and solve a crisis like this?
I think we were talking about this backstage. I think there's no eloquent answer for this. And I have not heard, even in amongst my peers and colleagues, the answer that makes me feel like that's it. The way that I think about this, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it because I consider myself very much an abolitionist in a lot of ways around other issues. But because I'm entrenched in this issue and I deal with survivors across many different demographics, you know, all stripes, everybody's not in the same place. So I'm not gonna, one, try to impose my views and values on a survivor who is trying to just find a nugget. And if that nugget is, I'm gonna get this rape kit done, I'm gonna prosecute, I'm gonna whatever, I can educate about alternatives and other things, but it is not my position to tell you that this is what justice should look like for you. That's just not my role, right? And I won't take that role. But also, this is this thing I not struggle with, but I struggle with articulating well. I feel like we have to be very pragmatic right now. Like it is hard to say, you know, I'll give you an example. I have a daughter, and I'm a feminist, and I believe, you know, women and however you identify in the gender spectrum, you should dress how you want to and be free to whatever. And obviously I don't slut shame and all the rest of these things. And I have absolutely caught myself saying to my daughter, you gonna wear that? It's a little short, no? You know, I last year, she bawled me out because I made her take a picture off of Twitter. I just didn't like it. You know, but it was also about danger, right? And so I am struggling as a single parent trying to figure out how to keep my child safe. I have very limited options, it feels like sometimes. So yes, I'll say, when you come out of this thing at 2 o'clock in the morning, get right in the Uber, call me, blah, blah, blah. Don't go down here, keep your keys out. Do you have your mace? You know, yes, I'm gonna do that. And I won't lie and be a hypocrite and say if something happened to my child, that I won't, one, take it in my own hands. And two, if that's an option, if prison or whatever, or arrest was an option, that I wouldn't have to contemplate that in a real way. So these are the things that I grapple with. But I will say this. I think in the ideal, there's this pragmatic part, and then this way that we have to continue to also dream. I think it's problematic when you stay there. When your mind is closed, this is what your options are, and that's it. I think we have to dream about new paradigms for safety, and we have to shift the narrative. If we can, this is the gray area stuff you were talking about. If we can shift away from a singular crime and punishment framework, it would help for people who don't want to invest in this carceral system or have that as the only option. We have to talk about harm and harm reduction, right? So many ways that people experience sexual violence don't rise to the level of crime. And so then what? You're just out of options? If this is a part of the sort of re-education and re-socialization that has to happen. If you harm somebody, there has to be recourse. You have to be accountable for the harm you cause. That accountability does not have to look like jail all the time, but there has to be a system of accountability. We don't have great examples of what that accountability can look like, and that's where the visioning and the dreaming has to come in. I say this in college campuses often because I think they are great spaces to incubate some of these ideas. Think about the different ways that you can go about giving people a sense of safety, applying new paradigms of justice, right? These are places where we can kind of experiment with that. And college is in some ways about trying and failing, right? Don't fail. But you know what I mean? Like this is young, they're young. And so I am always trying to think of, one, how to articulate this in a way that doesn't feel offensive to people. but also that's just real. It is, I want to acknowledge people's real lived experience, and I can just sit here and be like, we don't believe in a carceral state and blah, blah, blah. That's just not real for everybody. And if I am going to be in a leadership position, that means that you are here to serve every single person who comes forward and says, I'm a survivor. And that's difficult because they look like everything, right? So that's just where I am. I'm constantly thinking about it and constantly trying to find better ways to articulate it and better frames to use and things like that. But this is where I am today. Yeah. So.
Absolutely, and it sounds a lot like us also just having integrity in the way that you go
Yeah.
about these things.
Yeah.
I think that often in movements and even when we talk about these issues, we get very idealistic about what's
Very.
possible and what's not possible. And I
Yes.
think having accountability and integrity in how you kind of move forward with that. I am really interested in these gray areas. Partially not as a distraction, but I do think that a lot of people are grappling with it.
Yeah.
And the way that, crimes or experiences may not fit within the this was a crime, this would, could be, you could bring this to the police, and also kind of how do you come back from those moments, right? I think we had a couple of examples. We had that shitty men in media list, right? There was,
yeah.
there was, there was kind of the Aziz Ansari story, which, wasn't really fact checked and really did impact his career. And
can I say something about that in terms of accountability? I have been thinking a lot about Dave Chappelle and Aziz Ansari because they both have these comedy specials, right? And I know Dave Chappelle wasn't accused of anything, whatever, but he kind of took on.
Yes, he really did.
Took it under his.
Really did.
Decided that he was just going to go down this road.
I think he's upset about Louis C.K. That's yeah.
Why do I want to curse so much tonight?
They can handle it. They're college students.
I know, but it's recorded, and I'm supposed to be a lady. That's a joke. I'm a total fucking lady. But I want, and some people are not comfortable. I've said this in places where people are like, I don't agree with you, but I think Aziz Ansari's response, has anybody seen his stand-up? I think for somebody who had probably was on the lower spectrum of violation, if you will, the way that he approached it, he didn't act like it didn't happen. He talked very clearly about what his year has been like, and not from this has been a really messed up year, but what did I learn? What did I do? How did I try to make this situation, turn this situation around from a standpoint that I need to learn something? He was humble. I mean, they all gonna be humble, but I think he was legitimately humble. Yeah. And I said, why can't why can't these other folks at least have some lesson? It's not perfect, but at least he didn't. I'm just so angry at the folks who kind of hide for 6 months and then peek their head like, Louis C.K., you mad about Louis C.K.? Louis C.K. is a whole asshole. Yeah. Put that on the thing. Yeah. Louis C.K. is an asshole. Right? And I'm going to tell you, he was one of my favorite comedians. Yeah. Right? I loved his show. I love Louis C.K., but you're going to come back and start talking about trans folks and children getting shot. What are we supposed to do? And this is the thing about accountability with these public figures that I think they don't get. You want my support, right? If accountability for me, I don't tell anybody what it should look like, but for me, when I think about accountability, you start with the person you harmed first. So before you bring your face out into the public, wherever, did you go to the people who you caused harm to and ask them what they need? Right? Did you try to have a process, any kind of process, restorative process with them? And they may say, I don't want that. I don't want anything to do with you, which is their right. But you have to start there. But the second layer of that is you want me to laugh at your jokes, buy your tickets, watch your specials, and you think you're not accountable to me and my values are not supposed to come into play on how I spend my money and my time? You are mistaken. And so, yes, you do owe me something, Louis C.K. and whoever the hell else. Right? You don't get to come and tell nasty, stinky jokes and be offensive and be a damn sexual predator. Come on, B, that's too much.
Big one.
It's too much, right? And so I think that this if we're gonna have a conversation about the celebrities and the men and can they come back, I don't want to have that conversation unless we're talking about survivors first. Don't talk to me unless you are gonna tell me what you did about the harm that you cause. And that is different from this whole thing that people are trying to say, like, Me Too is taking away due process, which clearly most of the country doesn't know what due process is. I'm just like,
Yeah.
Google is never busy.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, stop having these wrong conversations and let's have a better conversation. Okay, go ahead.
And if anything, this focus and interest on these individual actors is once again taking the spotlight away from survivors and the people that have come forward and
Absolutely.
with their stories. So talk to me a little bit. So Me Too is an organization.
It is.
And so the last time I saw you had been, it was your 7th speaking gig in a week.
Yeah.
So, you know, so with the organization and when you're not at the Vanity Fair party or the Diamond Ball, what does it look like to be a day-to-day organizer in this space? What is a day in your life?
It definitely doesn't look like Vanity Fair and all the rest of that stuff. In fact, I had this moment last year when I wasn't, so, you know, you go to first year, right? And it's a new world. I don't remember growing up the people who were organizers, and to be a celebrity organizer when I was growing up meant you were on the news, right? Like you saw them on TV in some place, but not like at a ball or a gala. That wasn't our lives. It's not. People ask me all the time, but did you dream about? Is this what you envision? I'm like, what person who is in the community organizer, like, you know what I want to be? On a cover of Time magazine one year. I'm going to the Oscars. Like, nobody thinks.
My favorite thing you said the other day is people ask you what Oprah smells like.
They do. They do. They do. They do all the time. What does she smell like? I'm like, money you'll never have. But, you know, so last year the first year I go to Vanity Fair, and I did go to the Oscars, so it made sense. You go to the little parties after, and I was like, oh, and I took my daughter, and it was a whole thing. So then I get invited this year, and I was like, okay.
Guess I'm a regular.
We're gonna go back. I take my daughter again. I wear a better dress. And I said to my girlfriend, but similar to last week, I was so tired at the Oscar week. I had done all of this stuff. And I was like, I wonder, like, I'm glad to be here, I guess, but I'm so tired. I feel like I don't want to be here, but I wonder how I would feel if I didn't get invited. Yeah. It creates this weird paradigm. Like, so now I don't feel like a celebrity because, you know, I'm about to hop on a train home. Or I'm going to take an Uber, actually, but still. I don't feel like this, whatever, but my day-to-day life is, so I break it down into this media, right? And a lot of the media I do is very strategic about shifting this narrative. And so just like I'm having this conversation here, I try to do, you know, I wasn't really thoughtful in those first months, like 6 or so months after. I said yes to everything. And so I found myself on like MSNBC and CNN every other week when there was a new thing, and it'd be like, Tarana, Burke, founder of the Me Too movement, what do you think about this person? And I'd be like, the same thing I thought last time. Still an asshole. It just wasn't productive, and it was running counter to what I was saying in the public, which is we have to stop letting the media define this thing, right? And so I try to be very strategic about media and placement of our story and our work so that people know what Me Too is, what we've been working on for the last year. So we have a team now. There's also Me Too is not Tarana Burke, thank God. I raised some money last year, not much, but enough to hire some people. And so I have also been introduced to the corporate world. Very interesting. When you spend your whole life like corporate America is the enemy,
yep.
And then I started getting invited to stuff, and I was going in there like, with such an attitude, you know? And then you realize that people work in corporate America, and survivors, and there are people who, and they're not all like great. I'm not trying to, this is not a commercial for corporate America, but I found people inside of those corporations who were very caring, who are very in tune, and who has some influence. And so that's really how the philanthropy of corporate America works. There's some good person inside who's like, hey, y'all, we got to do something, all this millions and millions of dollars. And so I teamed up with an advertising agency. I don't want to tell, I do ramble, I'm sorry. It's a long story, but I was in Cannes, which sounds really fancy, but I was in Cannes. because I did a Levi commercial. It's so hard to say these things sometimes. Like, so I was in Cannes because I did like a Levi commercial.
No, I went to Cannes, and I thought it was pronounced Cannes, and I kept saying, I'm at Cannes, and everyone was like,
No, you're
where
not.
you're, like, tell me where you are.
You know what? I didn't even go to the Cannes Film Festival. There's this whole other thing that y'all don't. Do you know about this? The Lion? Y'all know about this? Cannes Lion? Oh, see, I don't know stuff.
It's like the advertising. It's like the
It's
Oscars,
like the Oscars
for
for advertising. I go to Cannes Lion because my Levi's thing was nominated for a thing, and they asked me to come do a talk. So I go, and I'm just like, first of all, there's so much money in the world. This is an interesting thing coming from both poverty or working class background and an organizing nonprofit background. Every time I go to something, I'm counting how much money they spend. I'm like, this food probably cost them $10,000.
Or, you know, when they mistakenly forward you your itinerary and you
Exactly.
see what the
And you're
actual
like,
plane ticket cost, and you're like,
oh my gosh. Yeah, it's interesting to me. So I'm in Cannes, and they're like yachts and boats and parties, and I'm just like, okay, y'all spend so much money. So anyway, I meet these people who are amazing from this organization, this company called FCB. It's the advertising agency. Long story short, after a very engaging conversation with their CEO, who I didn't know was the CEO at the time, he asked, what can we do for you? And you know, nonprofit is cut me a check. Cut me a check, you know? But I was like, okay, let me be a little smarter. Because you cut a check and then that's it, right? You walk away. We've been working together for almost a year now. And I basically was like, what do you do? I don't need a commercial, right? And I'm so naive. I thought advertising agencies just made commercials. They were like, no. So they have this whole data research arm, and we've partnered with their data research arm to build us a digital tool that is so amazing. I said to them, I need a way to both gauge what empathy looks like in communities based on a certain set of criteria. And by that, and they're like, how do we, with the empathy scale? I'm like, I know, you wanted me to dream. I'm telling you what I need. And I need a way for people to understand what's available in their community and how they can be active. Because we have to shift away from this idea that Me Too is something that people watch. Even the most well-meaning people are standing on the sidelines. And I said this, we get emails all the time of what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? And I was like, because people are so far removed from the idea of what real movements are, right? A hashtag is not a movement. It's a tool. It's a galvanizing tool, and it's an amazing tool, but it's not a movement, right? It's a tool for the movement. Movements are feet to the street. It's people and bodies engaging in a work that moves forward a common goal. And I need for folks to get in this movement and feel like they're a part of their movement. So they helped us build this tool that it helps people figure out what action can look like in their community. And so you'll be able to like put in your zip code or geotags and all kinds of like technical stuff. And it'll tell you what's here. And it could be anything from volunteering, donating, joining a campaign, right? And so I've been working on that. And at the same time, building this digital platform. I call it a digital platform because I want people to understand it's bigger than a website. It's a fancier way of saying that. But when I started this work, in a very real way, Google was just becoming popular, right? We was still on some like Ask G's, you know? And so Google was just becoming popular, and I would search literally because I didn't know what I was doing. I had like my experience as a survivor, and I was trying to build this work we were doing based on what I felt like I needed at the age the girls were. But I wanted more information, and there just was none. It was so difficult to find websites, statistics, all of that stuff. And it's still very difficult. It's still very difficult. If you go right now and like search for anything around sexual violence, it takes you to like 1 or 2 websites, right? And whatever they did to optimize and blah, 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 so that they're the first ones to come up, I had to learn about that too. Like people, can you scam on the internet? It's so crazy. You know, of course y'all know about this.
An entire career, yeah.
Yeah, like people pay people to make sure that they're the first person to come up. Yeah. I'm sorry, whatever. So it just fascinates me. Like, y'all are so greedy. Whatever. So anyway, well, now we're going to do it. I was like, can we do that? How much does that cost? So anyway, our digital platform is a space for healing and action. When you leave here and talk about Me Too, in the most succinct way, when people say, well, what did you learn about what this movement really is? You can simply say, this is a movement about healing and action. Our work is about making sure that survivors of sexual violence have the resources. We're not dictating what healing looks like, but we are saying that healing is possible. And because it's a lifelong journey, not a destination, you need to be introduced to a wealth of resources and a wealth of avenues that may feel comfortable for you. And so our website, our platform, will take people through a sort of digital journey, if you will, to help you. Like, we want to redefine crisis. And right now, if you feel like you're in crisis and you go online and look for help, it's going to give you a 1-800 number or a chat number. And that's sort of where it is. And those spaces are for like, this thing happened to me yesterday and I want to know what to do. Because of Me Too being so big and because sexual violence is so in the lexicon now, we talk about it so much, there are so many people who I watched the R. Kelly documentary. I'm in crisis. It has triggered me in ways that I didn't realize. Or I keep seeing Me Too everywhere, and it's bringing up this thing for me, and I don't know what to do with it. Or I think my child might be in danger, and I don't know how to gauge that. And so we have built this library of information for people. Because a lot of times, you may be triggered if you can read something about what de-escalation is. Because there's no 800 number to say, I feel fucked up right now, right? But so I'm trying to think of, we get thousands of emails a week, and we kind of took the emails and what are the most popular questions that we get, the most popular requests, and we try to answer that through the internet, through the website. So there's that. There's also this really wonderful library and statistics, all of the kind of stuff people want, and then our program. So my day-to-day work is getting this stuff off the ground, but also we have actual field programs that are starting in the spring. So we'll have survivor leadership training. These are the same programs we had 15 years ago. So survivor leadership training and community healing circles. I believe in the power of community healing, both for individual community healing and healing your community from sexual violence, right? We have to think about the violence that happens in our communities as our collective responsibility. And so I think because survivors have to be the drivers of this movement and of this work, and we have to actively work to help people heal while taking action, our community healing circles teach people how to do that. And the survivor leadership training is essentially organizing training with a gender-based violence lens. But I'm probably, people starting to leave, I know I'm going on and on. I just want to say this last thing. It's because my point about folks who get shot in the community and how people rally around, there's always like a first responder, right? So there's violence that happens, and you'll see this often. Violence will happen in the community. People will organize to make sure further violence doesn't happen. And when it does, there's a group of people who respond in some way or another. We don't have that around sexual violence. And so part of the goal of survivor leadership training is to create a cadre of first responders in our communities for the people who are not going to go to Rape Crisis Center, for the people who are, and then I go and make speeches.
Yeah.
Do you have the energy for a few questions?
Yeah, so
Sure.
I know people have some
All right.
questions in the audience.
So why don't we take, instead of answering every one of them, and you could come down, it might be a little easier. Why don't 3 people ask their question, and then you can sort of respond, generally, so we get through a few more people. So
Okay,
start
sure.
lining up. Go ahead and start over there. We'll do 3.
Hi, my name is Siri. I'm a student here. I'm a journalism minor, and I'm wondering, this actually came up in one of our classes today, but how do we report on sexual violence in a responsible way, kind of acknowledging that the way that sexual violence has been reported on before is kind of patriarchal in terms of the law and, how we prevent ourselves from, we distance ourselves from it.
But I think that's the answer. I think that if you are a journalist and you are a responsible journalist, you will do more due diligence. If you acknowledge that the ways that it's been reported on in the past have been deeply problematic, then you have to be intentional about making sure you report differently. And you know, it's not supposed to, but we know your personal politics show up in how you report. If that is your personal politic, for sure, you need to be very intentional about making sure that you deconstruct some of those patriarchal themes that show up in how sexual violence is reported. I feel like it's a responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for everything. So I remember when I was in high school, and although it was pretty whitewashed, there was kind of like a conversation surrounding sexual assault on college campuses. There was like the Hunting Ground documentary that came out. There was Know Your Nine. There were these sort of like grassroots organizations. And I feel like in the past 2 years, the conversation sort of died down, specifically on college campuses. And like, though it may not have been intersectional at all to begin with, what do you think people on college campuses can do differently now to sort of spur up that conversation again, specifically within the movement?
I'm going to say this. I spoke at 107 colleges last year. I would have said I agree before then. I think that this conversation is actually being driven by college campuses in a lot of ways. There's so much activity. It's just not, you know, national news or what have you, but there's so much activity, and I'm so excited about what's happening in college campuses because of what happened is I think it was dying down in a mainstream sort of way, and then Me Too reinvigorated it in a lot of ways. So, I mean, these young people on college campuses are doing really amazing work, and I think that this is a moment. And I tell young people this all the time: your school, 9 times out of 10, does not want to be on the wrong side of this issue. So, I mean, as an organizer, you use what you have, right? Take advantage of that, and this is a time to push the envelope a little further, right? I worked with some young people out at SUNY Stony Brook last year around yes, we have to take back the night. Yes, we're gonna in April all wear teal and blah blah blah. But the highest rate of sexual violence on college campuses happens between August and October. So we can't wait to April to have these conversations. So one of the things that need to happen on college campuses is a constant, consistent conversation. And administration, you have to push the administration to live into those values that they put in those mission statements and blah, blah, blah. You have to push them to live into those values. So, I mean, it's the answer I give for everything. Organize. And I don't mean join an organization. I mean organize. Get groups of people who feel the same way together and figure out some new and innovative way to push the administration so that you deserve protection and safety on your campus. Absolutely. Because it's your community, because you pay tuition, and because you're a human being. So absolutely organize. But I do think colleges are hotbeds right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hi, Tarana.
Hi.
Hi, Tarana. Loved hearing you talk. So I have 2 quick questions. One is...
Oh, you probably don't have to ask one, though. We're going to get in trouble.
Sorry. So the first is, I've heard you speak a lot about restorative and transformative justice, but I wonder if you could tell us like what it might actually look like in the real world, because I feel these are words that are being used a lot, but I feel a lot of people do not know how they might actually translate into the real world. And my second question is, like, what's the best way for smaller fledgling feminist movements to reach out to you and the Me Too organization?
I'm trying to shoot her shot. You see that? So I will say this, and this is kind of what I was saying in my answer. I think that many of us who are dealing with this are still grappling with what that looks like in the real world. But I will say that it has to have a container. And so that's why college campuses and institutions and communities and organizations are great spaces to create models for that. So there's a woman named Miriam Kaba in Chicago who is just a brilliant mind around transformative and restorative justice. And you know, she has done work like leading people in her community through a transformative justice process. I think it looks like people trying new things, create a process with a group of people who have agreed to be accountable. Right? That's where you have to start. And try it and see how it works. I think in a real way, we have to keep dreaming up and reimagining these ideas around safety and justice and then try them. So I think you're right. We get very idealistic and they write white papers and they do research and nobody implements anything. Try it. And if it's a royal failure, I mean, you know, I hope it isn't, but I think there's space for us to fail a little bit and to reassess. But I think that's the best way we can put it in action right now. Okay. And go to my website.
Okay, so I hate to be this person, but I think I see a lot of people lining up.
Is
We
it
can
one
take
on one
two
side?
more questions.
Who's it? Hi.
Hi.
One here, one here.
Thanks.
Okay.
Well, I'm an international cohort. I'm Andrea. I'm an academic, and I'm researching how the media report on the Me Too, and I've had a few articles published about it, academic articles. But I heard you're coming to Australia in November for the Victoria Women's Trust. Are bringing you out on the 18th of November. I'll be there. Okay. And I was just wondering what to expect from coming down under about the movement. What have you heard about our movement down there?
So I am going to Australia. I'm receiving the Sydney Peace Prize in November, and I'll be there for a long time.
It takes like a year.
It takes like a year to get there, right? And so what I understand about what's happening in Australia and in other places is that a lot of the conversation is about sexual harassment in the workplace.
Yes.
And the conversation hasn't really extended to survivors of sexual violence across the spectrum. And so I've already been in a lot of conversations there with people and journalists trying to push that conversation a little bit further than where it is. And it's in other countries. I've spoke to folks who are doing Me Too India and Me Too Ghana, and and it's interesting. They're kind of modeling after what they think Hollywood's version of it is. But even Hollywood is not sexual harassment in the workplace, right? Like, we have to call Harvey Weinstein a rapist because, we're not talking about somebody telling crude jokes. We're talking about somebody who kicked in somebody's door and raped them. So yeah, that's what I know about what's happening. And the laws are different out of the country. So the defamation laws are tricky, like in France and in Australia. The onus is on the accuser. And so there was a big loss in Australia, and there was a big loss recently in France around this, where the women could not prove their case around, and they were accused of defamation. So yeah, that's sort of where the conversation, I've been thinking about, like the conversation in Australia about how we can expand the scope of what they feel Me Too is.
Thank you, and you're both great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
It's on you, sis.
Okay, so much pressure. Hi, I'm Amber. I'm a student here at the New School, and I actually work at SAG-AFTRA in EEO and diversity. You had mentioned that there is a racial element to this, and talking about Hollywood's obsession with white women. So I kind of wanted to know, what is the racial element to Me Too? Because, or like more so like the intersectionality of it, because I don't want women of color, especially like Black women, to be like left by the wayside in this movement, and you're the leader of it. So
yeah, and I'm glad you ended with that, right? Because here's the thing that always feels both tricky to me and in some ways offensive. Not that you said anything offensive, but this notion that Black women, women of color, are people of color, whatever, are left out of the Me Too movement is somewhat offensive, because if that's what you believe, it's because you don't understand what Me Too is, and you've bought into what white people have told you Me Too is. So you can't both have me acknowledge me as founder or leader and say that these people are left out, because my work centers them completely, right? But I get that in a mainstream sense, we don't see ourselves. We don't see ourselves represented. And let me tell you why. This is not tricky, but I sometimes I say things that people don't agree with, which is whatever. But I want us, and this is just me and you talking for a second, right? Let's pull the curtain. I want us to stop feeling like white folks' ice is colder. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There is no scenario in which I, as a singular person, or any of us, could have made Me Too become what it is. Because if it was, it would have happened, right? There's no scenario in which the mainstream media was going to prioritize the trauma or pain or the reality of sexual violence in our communities. We're not going to see a CNN or MSNBC special about how rampant sexual violence is for Native women or for, indigenous women, Black women. We're not going to see that. And if we do, they're probably going to fuck it up, right? And I get that representation is necessary. I support the idea of representation. That's why I did the R. Kelly and the blah, blah, blah. because representation is necessary, but I don't want us to get caught up in waiting for them to represent us or waiting for them to validate that our trauma is just as bad and our pain is just as bad, because it's still happening. And there's some ways that we lean into that argument and ignore the reality of what sexual violence is in our communities. So that's not what you asked necessarily, but that's a part of my, I just wanted to share like part of what my frustration is around this sometimes, because I answer this question a lot. For me, the racial element obviously does fall along the lines of representation. And there's some internal conversations we have to have and some external conversations we have to have, right? And I'm really interested in us digging into those internal conversations. We have a lot of the external conversations, a lot of them. And I think they're valuable for some people, but to me, they start losing their value if we can't shift and talk about what's actually happening. Because while we're fighting for representation and fighting for folks to see that Black women have just as much and blah, blah, pain and blah, 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 it's still happening. And nobody's focusing on that. Nobody's working on that. Nobody's trying to do anything to solve that. And I just don't want to spend my energy trying to get white folks to validate that my pain is real. I just can't do it, right? Like they disappoint me. I'm sorry, y'all, but they disappoint me so much in so many different ways that I cannot expend that kind of energy anymore. I'm at a particular place, though. There are people who are in place for different reasons. There are going to be some folks who need to fight for that representation, and I stand by them and I support them. It's just not my ministry. And I want more of us to move away from that because it's just not going to happen in the ways that are going to make us feel whole and seen. It's just not. We have to validate each other. We have to see and accept that the pain and trauma that we see is real in each other. And we have to acknowledge that we have the power to do something about the trauma in our own communities while we're waiting on other folks to come in and be like, you know what, R. Kelly is a perpetrator. Let's do a story about him. We off that. You know what I mean? So I hope that answers your question. And I'm always scared that somebody's going to tape this and be like, she was da, 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 da. But you get what I'm saying, right?
I got you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we made it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you so much for your generosity in talking with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for staying.